I stood in the lawyer's office feeling like I'd been gut-punched. My father had died 3 weeks earlier, and now his will was being read. My half-brothers Marcus and Daniel sat smugly across from me, their expensive suits contrasting sharply with my worn work jeans. We'd never been close. They were Dad's sons from his first marriage, raised in the city with their mother after the divorce. I was the son from his second marriage, the one who'd stayed on the ranch, worked the land beside him for 30 years. The lawyer cleared his throat. To Marcus and Daniel Thompson, I leave the entirety of Thompson Ranch, approximately 2,000 acres. All buildings, livestock, and mineral rights. Estimated value, $2.3 million. My brothers smiled. I felt sick. The lawyer continued. To my son Jake Thompson, I leave the 1947 Ferguson tractor currently stored in the north barn, along with all tools and implements associated with it. A rusty tractor, 60 years old, probably worth $2,000 if I was lucky. That was my inheritance for 3 decades of sweat and loyalty. Marcus actually laughed. Guess Dad knew who the real businessmen were. Daniel smirked. You can keep playing farmer, little brother. We're selling this place to developers next month. I wanted to punch them both. Instead, I stood and walked out, my vision blurred with tears and rage. That night, I sat in the barn, staring at the old Ferguson tractor. It was rusty, outdated, covered in decades of grime. Dad had kept it long past its useful life, refused to scrap it despite my suggestions. This tractor has history, he'd always said. I thought he was just being sentimental. Now I wondered if he'd been mocking me, leaving me a worthless relic while my brothers got everything. I ran my hand along the cold metal, feeling utterly betrayed and lost. The next morning, I started cleaning the Ferguson, not because I wanted to, but because I needed something to do with my hands, some way to process the anger. My brothers had already hired a real estate agent. Signs would go up next week advertising premium development land. Everything Dad and I had built would become subdivisions and strip malls. I scrubbed years of grease and dirt from the tractor's engine, my movements mechanical and bitter. As I worked, I noticed something odd. Mounted on the dashboard was a small GPS unit, clearly modern and completely out of place on a 1947 tractor. It was solar-powered, still active. I'd never noticed it before, probably because the tractor had been parked in a dark corner for years. Why would Dad put GPS on an antique tractor that barely ran? I powered up the unit. It showed a single saved waypoint labeled The Line. Curiosity overrode my bitterness. I spent the afternoon getting the Ferguson running. The engine fought me, coughing and sputtering, but eventually roared to life with surprising power. Whatever else Dad had done, he'd kept this tractor mechanically sound. I programmed the GPS to guide me to the waypoint. It was located in the far northwestern corner of the ranch, an area I rarely visited because it was nothing but rocky hills and scrub brush, useless for grazing or farming. The drive took 2 hours, the old tractor managing perhaps 10 miles per hour across rough terrain. As I approached the coordinates, I found myself in a narrow canyon I'd honestly forgotten existed. The GPS indicated I'd arrived. I stopped the tractor and looked around, seeing nothing but rocks, sagebrush, and a weathered fence line that marked what I'd always believed was the edge of our property. What was I supposed to find here? I felt foolish, chasing wild gooses while my brothers prepared to destroy everything. I walked along the fence line, frustrated and confused. Then I noticed something that made me stop cold. The fence posts on this section were newer than the rest, maybe 10 or 15 years old, but deliberately weathered to look ancient. Someone had replaced them to match the surrounding fence. Why would Dad do that? I followed the fence further and found a steel survey marker driven into the ground, partially hidden by brush. This marker was official, placed by county surveyors. I pulled out my phone and loaded the county property mapping website. According to the official records, our property line should be exactly where this fence stood. But as I compared the GPS coordinates to the county map, something didn't align. The numbers were off by approximately 800 feet. 800 feet of canyon, extending northwest into what I'd always believed was Bureau of Land Management territory. My heart began racing. Could there be a surveying error? Had someone moved the boundary markers? I spent the next 3 hours walking the canyon, finding more survey markers, all carefully hidden but official-looking. Each one suggested our property extended much further than anyone realized. I took photographs, recorded GPS coordinates, and felt a growing excitement mixed with disbelief. If this was real, if Dad had discovered a surveying error or hidden boundary, it could mean hundreds of additional acres that weren't included in the will because nobody knew they existed. But why hadn't Dad told anyone? Why the secrecy? As sunset approached, I found something else. A small cave entrance, partially concealed by brush, with a weathered metal box tucked inside. I opened it carefully, finding a thick folder of documents protected in plastic. Inside were old surveys, county records, hand-drawn maps, and a letter in Dad's handwriting. My hands trembled as I began reading. "Jake, if you're reading this, you found the line. Good. Now listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will change everything." Dad's letter explained everything. 15 years ago, while researching ranch history for a property tax dispute, he'd discovered an error in the original 1892 survey that established our land boundaries. The surveyor had made a critical mistake, using the wrong benchmark and effectively shifting our northwestern boundary 800 feet southeast. Every subsequent survey had simply copied the error, and for over a century, nobody had noticed. Dad had hired private surveyors to confirm the mistake. The additional land, approximately 340 acres, legally belonged to us. But here's where it got complicated. Dad explained that the hidden acreage contained something valuable, a small but high-quality water source, increasingly rare in our drought-prone region. More importantly, preliminary geological surveys suggested potential mineral deposits, possibly including rare earth elements becoming crucial for technology manufacturing. Dad had kept this discovery secret because he didn't trust Marcus and Daniel. He'd known they would immediately sell everything, and he wanted to ensure I had something they couldn't take, couldn't sell, couldn't destroy for quick profit. "The Ferguson tractor was your grandfather's," Dad wrote. "He taught me to farm on it, just like I taught you. It represents our family's real legacy. Hard work, loyalty, persistence. Your brothers don't understand that. They see dollar signs where we see heritage. I'm leaving them the known ranch because legally I must. But I'm leaving you the hidden land, because morally you've earned it. You stayed. You worked. You believed in what we built together. This is your inheritance, son, the one that matters." I sat in the cave reading and rereading the letter, tears streaming down my face. Dad hadn't betrayed me. He'd protected me. The entire rusty tractor inheritance had been a smokescreen, a way to hide the real gift until I was ready to discover it. The GPS had been his way of ensuring I'd find the truth. Everything suddenly made sense. His insistence on keeping the Ferguson, his mysterious trips to this corner of the ranch, his calm acceptance when the lawyer drafted the will. I spent the next week quietly researching Dad's claims. I contacted the county surveyor's office, examined historical records, and consulted with 2 independent surveying companies. Everyone confirmed what Dad had discovered. The original 1892 survey contained a documented error. Our legal property line extended approximately 800 feet further northwest than the fence indicated. The 340 acres had technically belonged to Thompson Ranch for over a century, but nobody had ever noticed or claimed them. The legal implications were clear. Because the land had been surveyed incorrectly and never properly claimed, it wasn't included in Dad's estate inventory. It wasn't mentioned in the will. Legally, it existed in a kind of limbo, owned by the Thompson family, but not specifically allocated to any heir. As Dad's son and the person who discovered the error, I had strong legal grounds to claim it. But I needed to act before Marcus and Daniel learned about it and tried to include it in their sale. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed all my evidence with growing excitement. "Your father was thorough. These documents are bulletproof. We need to file a quiet title action immediately, establishing your exclusive claim to the disputed acreage before your brother's sale proceeds. Once we record the corrected boundary with the county, that land becomes legally separate from the main ranch. They can't sell what they don't own." We worked fast. Within 10 days, Patricia had filed all necessary paperwork with the county. The corrected survey was officially recorded. The 340 acres were legally separated from the main ranch and titled exclusively in my name. Marcus and Daniel had no idea what was happening. They were too busy meeting with developers, calculating their profits, planning their exit from what they'd always considered a backward family business. Their ignorance bought me the time I needed to secure everything. The confrontation happened in the ranch house kitchen 2 weeks later. Marcus and Daniel had invited me to discuss final arrangements before the sale closed. They were magnanimous in victory, offering me a temporary job helping with the transition. "You know the property," Daniel said condescendingly. "It would be helpful to have someone show the developers around." I almost laughed at their arrogance. Instead, I pulled out a folder of documents and spread them across the kitchen table. "Before you sell, there's something you should know. Dad left me more than just a tractor." I showed them the corrected survey, the legal filings, and the title documents proving I now owned 340 acres they'd never known existed. Marcus's face went from confused to red with anger. "What the hell is this? You're trying to scam us!" Daniel grabbed the documents, reading frantically. "This can't be legal. The will specified all ranch property. This is still ranch property." Patricia had prepared me for this reaction. I stayed calm. Actually, this land was never properly surveyed or titled as part of the ranch estate. It exists in a legal gray area that Dad discovered years ago. By correcting the survey and filing the proper paperwork, I've claimed what was always ours but never officially documented. It's completely legal. Patricia's already confirmed it with 2 judges. Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "We'll fight this. We'll sue you into oblivion." I shrugged. "You can try. But here's what you might not know. That land contains the ranch's primary water source. All the wells on your 2,000 acres draw from the aquifer that runs under my 340. Water rights in this state follow the land. I now control the water access." The color drained from Daniel's face. He understood immediately. Without guaranteed water access, their development deal would collapse. Buyers wouldn't pay premium prices for land without reliable water. I'd just destroyed their $2 million sale. The brothers left without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, 2 days later, Patricia called with news. "They've filed an emergency injunction trying to block the title transfer. They're claiming your father was mentally incompetent when he researched the survey error and that you've committed fraud." I'd expected this. Patricia had expected this. "Do they have any real evidence?" I asked. She laughed. "None. They're lawyers grasping at straws. But we need to prepare for court. This could get ugly." The legal battle consumed the next 3 months. Marcus and Daniel hired expensive attorneys who threw every argument imaginable at the wall, hoping something would stick. They claimed Dad's research was flawed, that I'd manipulated him in his final years, that the survey correction was fraudulent, that water rights law didn't apply. Every claim was investigated and dismissed. Patricia systematically destroyed their case with Dad's meticulously documented evidence and testimony from the county surveyors who'd verified the error. During depositions, ugly family history emerged. Marcus admitted under questioning that he'd barely visited the ranch in 20 years. Daniel confessed they'd planned to sell immediately after Dad's death, had already negotiated terms before the will was even read. Their own words revealed what I'd always known. They saw the ranch as nothing but a commodity. They had no emotional connection to the land, no respect for Dad's life work, no interest in preserving anything beyond their bank accounts. The judge, an older man who'd apparently dealt with similar family disputes, grew visibly irritated with my brothers. During the final hearing, he listened to their lawyers' arguments for perhaps 10 minutes before interrupting. "Counsel, I've reviewed every document in this case. Jake Thompson discovered a legitimate surveying error, corrected it through proper legal channels, and claimed land that was legally his family's for over a century. Your clients inherited a profitable ranch. They're upset because they can't profit quite as much as they'd hoped. This court has no patience for greed disguised as legal principle." The judge ruled in my favor completely. The 340 acres were legally mine, along with all water rights. Furthermore, because Marcus and Daniel had acted in bad faith by trying to block legitimate legal correction of a surveying error, they were ordered to pay my legal fees. Patricia's bill had exceeded $30,000. The brothers were livid, but the ruling was final. They'd lost, and they knew it. The next day, their real estate agent called to inform them the development deal had collapsed. Nobody wanted land without guaranteed water access, but winning the legal battle left me with new problems. I now owned 340 acres, but I was cash poor from legal fees even after the brothers' payment. The land had potential value, but I couldn't develop it alone. Meanwhile, Marcus and Daniel still owned the main ranch. We were now neighbors who hated each other, sharing an aquifer and centuries of family resentment. The situation was untenable. Something had to change, but I wasn't sure what. That's when I received an unexpected visitor. Richard Thornton, the developer who'd planned to buy the whole ranch, showed up at my door. He was a middle-aged man with weathered hands and a surprisingly humble demeanor. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like to propose something different. I've spent 30 years developing land, most of it destructively. I'm tired of turning ranches into parking lots. What if we did something better?" I invited him inside, curious despite my skepticism of developers. Richard explained his new vision. "I want to develop a conservation-based community, small number of homes on large lots, preservation of natural landscapes, sustainable water management, maintained agricultural use for most acreage. Your 340 acres would be perfect as the preserved core. We'd build around it, not on it. You'd retain ownership and operation of the land while receiving easement payments. The surrounding development would actually increase your property value while funding continued ranching." It sounded almost too good to be true, but Richard's passion seemed genuine. Over the next month, Richard and I worked with environmental consultants, water engineers, and land use attorneys to develop a comprehensive plan. The model was revolutionary for our area. Instead of maximizing home density, we'd minimize it, creating 40 large-lot homesteads around my preserved core ranch. Each homestead would have water rights tied to sustainable aquifer management. Buyers would be required to maintain agricultural or conservation use on 80% of their land. My 340 acres would be permanently protected through conservation easements, while I'd receive annual payments totaling more than I could make from traditional ranching. The brilliant part was how the plan solved the Marcus and Daniel problem. Richard still wanted access to the main ranch for the surrounding development. My brothers still wanted to sell. But now, instead of a destructive conventional development, Richard offered them a partnership in the conservation community. The deal was worth less than their original $2 million, but still substantial, approximately $1.4 million. Given that their other options had collapsed, it was their best remaining choice. They could take it or hold on to a ranch neither knew how to operate, sharing water rights with the brother they'd tried to destroy. I expected them to fight it, but surprisingly, Marcus called first. He sounded exhausted. "Dad would have hated us, wouldn't he?" It wasn't really a question. "We came in planning to strip mine his life's work and didn't care who got hurt. You stayed loyal, and he protected you. I'm not saying I like you, Jake, but I understand now why he did what he did." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from my half-brother. Daniel was less emotional but equally pragmatic. "This conservation development is our best option. Let's do it." 6 months later, the first phase broke ground. Richard had been brilliant in marketing the community, attracting buyers who genuinely wanted to live sustainably and respect the land. These weren't wealthy people seeking trophy ranches, but families and retirees who valued conservation and agricultural heritage. They understood what we were building was special. My 340 acres remained the wild heart of the community, the untouched core that gave everything else meaning and authenticity. I rebuilt the old Ferguson tractor completely, restoring it to its original condition while keeping Dad's GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. It became a symbol of what we'd created, honoring history while embracing necessary change. I drove it regularly through the preserved acreage, maintaining the land exactly as Dad had taught me. People in the new community loved seeing the vintage tractor working the fields, a living connection to the ranch's heritage. Kids would wave, adults would stop and talk about agricultural history. The tractor that had seemed like a worthless inheritance had become the most valuable symbol of everything we were protecting. The conservation community thrived. Within 2 years, all 40 homesteads had been sold to carefully vetted buyers who shared our vision. The development won state and national awards for sustainable land use. Environmental organizations praised it as a model for how growth could happen without destroying agricultural heritage. Richard's company shifted its entire business model toward conservation development, using our community as the template. What started as my desperate attempt to save Dad's legacy had become a blueprint for change. Marcus and Daniel used their sale proceeds to invest in Richard's company, becoming partners in developing similar conservation communities elsewhere. They'd never be farmers or ranchers, but they'd found a way to honor Dad's values through business rather than agriculture. We weren't close, probably never would be, but the bitter hatred had evolved into distant respect. At our father's grave on the 2nd anniversary of his death, we stood together for the first time since the funeral. No words were spoken, but something had shifted. We'd all found our way forward. The hidden property line that Dad discovered had given me more than land. It had given me purpose. I wasn't just a ranch hand anymore. I was a steward, protecting 340 acres that represented something larger than property value. They represented the possibility that heritage and progress could coexist. Every day, I worked land that my grandfather had worked, that my father had protected, that I would preserve for future generations. The rusty tractor had led me to this truth. Real inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in responsibility, legacy, and the courage to honor those who came before while building something worthy of those who will come after. One evening, about 3 years after Dad's death, I received an unexpected call from a geology firm. They'd been conducting regional surveys and requested permission to conduct preliminary testing on my property. The test confirmed what Dad's old research had suggested. Significant deposits of rare earth elements existed beneath the surface. These minerals, crucial for technology manufacturing, were increasingly valuable. The geologist estimated potential value in tens of millions if properly developed, but extraction would require destroying the land's surface and consuming vast water resources. I met with Richard, Patricia, and a conservation attorney to discuss options. We could sell mineral rights, becoming wealthy beyond imagination but destroying everything we'd built. Or we could refuse development, preserving the land but foregoing generational wealth. It was another impossible choice. Another test of values versus money. As we debated, I kept thinking about Dad's letter, about his insistence that some things matter more than profit. I thought about the Ferguson tractor, about heritage and responsibility. The decision came easier than expected. I established a conservation trust, permanently restricting mineral development on the property while maintaining surface rights for agricultural use. The trust included provisions that if extraction technology ever became environmentally sustainable, a portion of proceeds would fund land conservation elsewhere. We'd protect these 340 acres absolutely, but enable protection of other threatened properties through future revenues. It wasn't completely refusing wealth, it was redirecting it toward purpose that matched our values. Dad would have understood. The announcement shocked the industry. Turning down potential tens of millions was considered crazy by conventional standards. But letters poured in from conservation organizations, from families in the community, from people who'd been following our story. One letter came from a high school environmental science class that had been studying our conservation community. They wrote, "You proved that people can choose legacy over money. Thank you for showing us that's possible." Those words meant more than any mineral deposit ever could. 5 years after inheriting the rusty tractor, I married Sarah, a woman I'd met at a conservation agriculture conference. She was a soil scientist who understood the value of what we'd built and shared my commitment to sustainable land management. We built a modest home on the property, using reclaimed materials and sustainable design. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, situated where we could watch sunrise over the hills Dad had loved. The Ferguson tractor sat in our barn, still functional, still driven regularly, still bearing Dad's GPS pointing to the line. Marcus surprised everyone by moving back to the area with his family. He'd realized, he said, that his kids needed to understand where they came from, to connect with land and heritage they'd never known. He bought one of the conservation homesteads and began learning sustainable agriculture. He'd never be the rancher Dad was, but he was trying, and that mattered. Daniel visited regularly from the city, bringing his children to experience rural life. The brothers and I weren't best friends, but we'd found peace. Dad's plan had worked better than even he could have imagined. The conservation community became a destination for people studying sustainable development. Universities brought students. Policymakers came to observe. We hosted workshops on water management, heritage preservation, and how to balance growth with conservation. The model we'd stumbled into through necessity had become something valuable beyond our property. Richard's company had developed 12 similar communities across 3 states, protecting over 15,000 acres while providing economically viable solutions for families who might otherwise have been forced to sell to destructive development. The impact rippled outward. On quiet evenings, I'd drive the Ferguson tractor through the preserved acreage, following the same paths Dad had driven decades earlier. The GPS still showed the waypoint he'd programmed, the line. But I understood now it wasn't just marking a property boundary. It was marking a different kind of line, the boundary between what's convenient and what's right, between short-term profit and long-term legacy, between seeing land as commodity versus seeing it as sacred trust. Dad had spent 15 years planning how to lead me to that line and help me choose the right side. Recently, I found another letter Dad had hidden in the Ferguson's toolbox, dated just days before his death. Jake, if you're reading this, you've discovered the land, fought the battles, and made the hard choices. I'm proud of you, son. Not because you're rich, you're probably not, knowing you, but because you've proven that our family's real wealth was never measured in acres or dollars. It was measured in character, in stubbornness to do right even when it costs you, in loyalty to things that matter even when others call you foolish. That's Thompson land, the internal kind. It can't be surveyed, sold, or stolen. You inherited it the day you were born. The letter continued with stories about Grandpa Thompson, about the struggles and choices that had defined our family for generations. Dad wrote about almost selling the ranch 3 times during tough years, about the temptation to take easy money and walk away. Each time, something had stopped him, not religion or philosophy, but simple, stubborn conviction that this land mattered in ways beyond profit. I'm leaving you the tractor because it represents every lesson Grandpa taught me and I tried to teach you. You maintain what matters, you preserve what has value, you protect what you love even when it's hard. I finished reading as sunset painted the canyon in gold and purple light. The same light that had illuminated these hills for millions of years, long before Thompsons arrived and long after we'll be gone. We're just temporary stewards, I realized, protecting something that doesn't belong to us, but through us. The hidden property line wasn't Dad's gift. The GPS wasn't the treasure. The real inheritance was the lesson itself, that some things are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth choosing even when every rational voice says do otherwise. I started the Ferguson's engine, feeling the familiar rumble, smelling the diesel exhaust, hearing the mechanical sounds that connected me to Grandpa, to Dad, to the whole chain of stubborn men who'd refused to let convenience or profit corrupt their responsibility to land and legacy. Tomorrow I'd wake up and work this property again, just as I had yesterday and would do tomorrow. Not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right. Because some treasures aren't buried in the ground. They're carried in your decisions, in your character, in your refusal to compromise on things that matter. Dad knew this. Grandpa knew this. And now, finally, so did I. Thank you for listening to my story. Dad's old Ferguson tractor is still running, still pointing toward that hidden property line that changed everything. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below telling me your location. And if you believe in protecting what matters, in choosing legacy over convenience, please subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. These lessons matter. And maybe, just maybe, they'll help someone else find their own hidden property line, the boundary between what's easy and what's right. Thanks for being here.